It had been a busy couple of months. Training took a heavy toll on my body. I had arrived to that black and gold landscape. Truthfully, I was surprised that the grass wasn't colored this way since everything else seemed to have been covered with this blanket. Fort Benning had become a home of sorts for a few months at that moment in my life. One type or another training requirement had kept me in one place or another. Ranger school took a heavy toll on my body, as it did with everyone that decided to walk that path. Things at home. Haha. Well, there really wasn't a home to talk about. I was technically single, sure, and I had become a couple again, but because of the high amount of training, it wouldn't have made sense to do anything more serious. She had driven a stake through my heart in the past. Sure, I had made a mistake as well, but instead of trying to talk to me, she decided she needed her revenge. It took a lot of time and a lot of company before I could forgive her, but I think she knew the reason why I was so distant, and she went well out of her way to make it clear that she was not up to anything that would cast further suspicion on her. Since she lived in my parents' property, she spent a lot of her free time with my mother learning how to take care of a household. I was surrounded by males, and the little time I had to myself I spent sleeping, eating, or taking care of my equipment one way or another. Boot shining had become a great way for me to slow my mind down and take a rare moment to look at that long road ahead of me. I was never known to be the planning type of person. I usually flew by the seam of my pants and kept my long-term plans to something within a few months. But when I slowed my mind down, things were much different. This night would be the last I would spend as a student, 30 days of leave and recuperation, and then on to Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, Georgia. I was looking forward to getting a good night's rest in a real bed, next to a warm body that wasn't covered in hair and did not snore as loud as a chainsaw. As a combat medic, I knew that I could be placed with any of the companies within the area, and as one of the few tabbed medics in the Army, I also knew that I would be a good commodity for the Ranger battalions. As I was gathering my few belongings, mainly uniforms and a few sets of civilian clothes, one of the Ranger instructors slowly made his way to where I was gathering my things. "Heard you're going to Savannah," the instructor said. His name was Kitchen. Like all the other instructors, Kitchen had always been beyond professional with everyone. Brutal, merciless, but professional. Not a bad place, good people there. "Roger," I replied without stopping, looking forward to it. "When you get there, look up a guy, workman, medic like us. He'll take care of you." Without another word, he turned and walked away. That was the reason Kitchen had taken such a liking to me. We were both medics. He placed the tam beret on his head and moved away onto the next batch of trainees. The shroud of the bad luck that seemed to follow me like a shadow kept up even during the next few months. During the last part of Ranger school, there was a hurricane that effectively forced training to come to a screeching halt, but not enough to force an evacuation. It was a miserable time, good training experience. When the rain subsided, the heat became almost hellish. It was suffocating. The soft land from the vicious rain and the fast evaporation of the trapped water within it made the perfect conditions for the inevitable. As we were working on one of the raids against the mock enemy, I happened to be the current platoon sergeant, and I wanted the assault squad to move from the south part their target. I had placed the support squad on the west part of the objective. They would have a small advantage as they would have a higher ground on the objective, and when the assault squad attacked, they would be able to shift fire to prevent any accidental friendly fire, but still allow them to fire onto the target and effectively shut down any escape routes. This was my first graded position in the last phase. So far, my previous experience had made it easy to receive first-time passing grades, a very rare thing to see in such a critical environment. Also, my very unconventional tactics drew a lot of attention from the Ranger instructors, but their role was more mentorship than one of creating unthinking robots. They often allowed the Ranger students to create their own tactics so long as they were safe. And from one camp to another, the rumors of the student that came up with crazy tactics that worked all the time made it easier for both my fellow students and the RIs to listen to my wild ideas. This one was no different than another tactic I had used at Camp Merrill. There, the objective was a small meth lab that handled distributions, and the potential for intel was great. The site itself couldn't have been better. After seeing the location up close, I turned the raid into an ambush quickly, using the assault squad to line up one side of a large dirty road that directly led into the site, and using the support squad as part assault and part suppression. Coordinating with the RIs, I requested air support, and instead of aiming it directly on the sire, which would have destroyed any potential intel, I had the target marked 100 meters north of the target. I had coordinated this to be the signal for one squad to open fire, and with my small group, we would assault from the east. This would be a quick hit and run tactic. We would run down the road, and hopefully this would force the opposing force to follow them. As soon as we cleared the last man in the ambush line, they would call for a safety kill to avoid any dangerous closeness to the OPFOR personnel and their blank-loaded rifles. After the ambush, the part of the assault from the suppression squad would then call for a ceasefire and move toward the buildings, taking any remaining OPFR as enemy prisoner of war that would help with the intel. After clearing, they could take their time investigating each building and gathering any intel necessary. All in all, they would take between 3 to 7 minutes on site, well within time standards. The plan worked without a hitch. A large amount of intel was successfully gathered, and I received my second first-time go in the mountains. There would be no need for a third-graded patrol, and my eagerness to help my fellow students made it nearly impossible for me to fail from this school. But this time, the perfect shitstorm hit us hard. With the water fiercely evaporating, the heavy weight of the students and our equipment put the extra strain necessary for the land to give way. It did. By the time everything had settled, 5 ranger students and a ranger instructor were trapped under a large amount of dirt and mud. Quickly forgetting our situation, I had dropped all my equipment and immediately moved to the area where my squad had stood. Following their leadership, the rest of the platoon followed both me and the RIs that were at a full run. As we reached the place, I turned and pointed at a group of the other students and ordered them to return to where they had gathered their rucksacks to secure their collapsible shovels as the OPFR drew their own. Chaos was overridden by need. We all had stopped being cadre and students. Under the circumstances, we worked together to rescue our brothers before they ran out of air. After the others returned with their shovels and got to work violently, within minutes they found all 6 bodies, all unconscious but alive. Quickly, the RIs had called the medics on coverage, while I quickly barked orders relaying the name of the equipment that would be needed. Oxygen, litters, and a few bandages to create splints. Other than a few bumps and bruises, they were otherwise well enough to avoid being sent to the hospital. After making sure that everyone was taken care of, I had to walk away from the group and took to a small, quiet, and private moment where I allowed a few tears to fall. After a few minutes, I heard soft footsteps walking toward my direction. We had been put on a safety stand down and the others were enjoying a brief break from the training in order to eat and replenish their spent calories. I recognized that these footsteps were not from a fellow student before the voice broke the silence. "You reacted faster than the other RIs," Moyer said. He was the RI that had gone to grade the assault squad leader and had been caught in the landslide with the other students. When he came to, the first thing he asked was about their welfare. This was the first priority of RIs. The welfare of the rangers assigned to them. "We would have been goners if you hadn't. Then you made sure that the medics had the equipment that they would need before they showed up. You guys wouldn't have been in that position if I hadn't placed you guys there. It was my plan, my tactic, my responsibility. Can I finish helping the others before I get sent home?" "What the hell are you talking about?" he asked. His voice rose. "Who told you that you were going anywhere other than back to training?" "Well," I replied, confused about the situation. "I almost got my squad killed. I almost got a senior instructor killed. Did you make it rain?" I shook my head and he continued, "Did you make the land slide from the weight of the water?" I again shook my head. "Then how did you almost killed anyone?" "Again," I replied, "it was my plan, my responsibility. I should bear the guilt." "I thought you medics were supposed to be smart," he laughed. "Doc, you're dumb as shit. You saved our lives, you dumb shit. Without your reactions, your instructions, and your instinct, well, we would probably still be under all that dirt." He extended his hand and I reached out to shake it. "Doc, you saved my life. I won't forget it." He didn't it. By the time we had finished with the course requirements, I had been introduced to the medical platoon sergeant, Kitchen, who immediately took me under his wing. He reasoned that since there weren't many of us, then he should make sure that I would live up to the legend of Ranger Medic. I was exhausted, physically and mentally, more than ready to just rest, forget about my thoughts, and just move on. The flight back home was uneventful. I had changed from uniform to civilian clothes, mainly so that I wouldn't have to interact with people that felt forced to interact with me simply because of my uniform, and was waiting for me as I arrived and picked up my luggage. Her embrace made it perfectly clear that she indeed missed me. I couldn't get a word out as she flooded me with kisses and roaming hands throughout my body. We barely made it to her car as she forced me to take the driver's seat before she started going to town on me. It was incredibly difficult to drive safely while, and was at work on me. "Where did you learn to do that?" Part of my question was based on suspicion, to be honest, but mainly it was because of the overwhelming sensations that I had never experienced with her before. "I have been watching a lot of movies," and replied with a slight giggle to her voice. "I take it you liked it?" "If I had liked it more, I probably would have been the first man to knock a woman," I replied as the light turned green. "I'm going to need a minute here before I can recover." "Your mom is expecting you," she replied. "I figured that this should hold you off until we can have some alone time." She has been waiting for this day for a while. She's pretty upset that you didn't tell her how long you would be gone before you took off. She didn't give me much choice, I replied. Even after so many months, I was still bitter about my mother's meddling in my life. Besides, she knew I wouldn't tell her anything about my life. She wasn't exactly supportive when I took off for basic. I didn't think she would be any different if I had told her I was going to ranger school. Yeah, again she giggled. We had a long talk about that, her and I. She seems to think that you came back for us to get married and that I would go with you. Honestly, Anne, I replied. I was half expecting this question would come up, but I figured it would come from my mother and not her. I haven't given it much thought. I thought by now you would have found someone. When I left, I was pretty sure we were both in agreement that we did not have any relationship. I know, but I wanted to make sure that you understood what I want, she said. I know I messed up and I promise you that it will never happen again. I was a kid, immature and just hurt. But I have done a lot of growing up, realized what you meant to me, and I don't want to ever put that at risk. Look, let me deal with my mother first, I said. After that we'll have plenty of time to talk. As we pulled up to my parents' house, it was obvious that a large party would be going on. My parents' idea of a surprise party mainly involves who brought what to drink and what type of meat I would be cooking. Shit, it's not as bad as it looks, again she giggled. Believe it, or not all the food is already cooked. Yes, she was well aware of my long-standing cooking duties. And they have been drinking since I left to go pick you up, so they will all be distracted playing dominoes, or whatever it is you men do when you drink. Shit, I continued. I saw my brother standing outside the main door, definitely not in the mood to deal with that bullshit. He just wanted to see you, she replied. Then he will leave. He doesn't want to cause any issues. Oh, you know what happened? No, she replied. Your mother wouldn't tell me anything about that, which to be honest was really weird. She is a huge gossip, and her telling me I had to get the story from you, or him, was kind of surprising. Before I could ask, she continued, yes, I tried asking him, but he told me it was a family matter, and if you felt that I should know, then you would have told me a while ago. As we stepped out of her car, my brother walked up to me, no emotion whatsoever in his face. I knew that my own face reflected a similar posture. Our mother was certainly watching us from somewhere. We both knew this, and we would do our best to remain cordial at the very least. Brother, he extended his hand, which I took. Glad to see you're back. When you have a minute. I don't. Fine, he said as he smiled at Anne. Good to see you again, and enjoy the party. He moved towards a vehicle parked outside the property and took the rear passenger seat. There was a man driving who kept a cold stare at me as they drove away. The warmth there, and said as she pretended to shiver and draw an imaginary coat close to herself, I could build a snow castle with all that love. It's a long story, I replied. Everyone keeps telling me that like it's some type of real answer. Whatever. She took my hand and led me inside the house. Let's just try to enjoy ourselves before we really enjoy ourselves. God, I missed this, and whispered as my lips traced a path along her neck near her ear. She was desperate. So was I. We had wild sex. I rolled over, looking up at the roof, and wondered if the decision I had taken earlier in the day was the right one. By the time we actually got out of bed to go eat breakfast, I had caught up with much-needed sleep. We didn't even bother with greetings as we walked into my parents' house. We just immediately dove into the food. My mother kept looking at me. All last night I avoided telling her anything about the school I had just completed, and even less about where I was headed. But I sensed that my luck was running out. Are you going to tell me where have you been the past months? She did not even wait until I had finished my second plate of food before she broke my peace. Wasn't planning to, I replied between bites. Where's Dad? He left early this morning to go get some more food for this afternoon. We figure you would want to eat your favorites before you left to wherever it is that you are going next. Lucky worm, I said. He should have woken me up. Be nice to your mother, and said, trying her best not to laugh. Mother, I replied. I was all over the place. So it's easier not to tell you where I was than to try to explain where I was and why I was there. And if I tell you everything I had been doing, you would just give me some grief. And the rest of my time here would be spent having to hear you go on and on about how dangerous things are. I would rather not deal with it. So it is dangerous? Her hand covered her mouth in such a dramatic fashion that I couldn't hold my laughter. And I was laughing too hard to try to make any coherent statement to my mother that would someday be used against me. You see, my mother suffers from a hearing loss. She can only hear bits and pieces of conversation that she can use to make dramatic scenes such as these. I pointed at my mother with my fork. Or things that she can use to make you feel like shit. If you're going to be hanging around her, make sure you get your hearing checked. Considering my brother's wives suffer from the same condition, I think it is highly contagious. So you two are getting married? My mother's glee was evident. broken only by the sound of Anne's laughter. "I see what you mean," she replied, laughing. "But you can't blame her for wanting her favorite son to get married to her favorite adopted daughter." "My brother is already married, though," I replied. "But if you're interested, I am sure I can set you up." She playfully punched me in the arm as I pulled my plate for a third helping. "I don't understand what is going on here," my mother whined. "And, are you guys getting married or not?" "Mom," I interrupted, "why is my brother's car here? Why is his car here?" I asked my mother, whose infamous meddling clearly continued. "Because he's here," she replied dryly. "He just wants to talk to you. You don't know how hard it is for me to have to balance and juggle which one of my children is going to come and visit." "Are you serious?" I asked. "Mother, you know what he did to me. I wouldn't be doing what I am doing if it wasn't for him." "It was an accident," she replied, panic and fear in her voice. Looking at and for support, she continued, "He hasn't told you yet? I thought having both of them here would have at least made him tell you what happened. How could you think that?" And grabbed my arm. "And why would you involve me in this entire situation?" "Because if you are going to be a part of this family," my mother said between sobs that I suspected were fake, "you need to know what happened." "I told you not to meddle, Mother." The ice and venom in my voice was not disguised. "I left for a reason. So that you could have your preferred son. That would be you, little brother." His voice broke the tension and replaced it with even more. "Why are you here, Angel? Did you not get the idea yesterday that I did not want to see you?" "I did," he replied as he smiled at Anne. "How are you, darling?" "Don't," I said as he tried to reach out for her. "Don't touch her. This is not my home, so I can't ask you to leave, but you people certainly can't force me to stay." I moved toward the door before and stopped me. "I think it's time for me to find out exactly what is going on here," she said. "I know I don't deserve it, but I think I should know what the hell is going on because it is clearly a big deal, and your mother seems to think that you two need to clear the air." I looked at my mother, who had rushed to my brother's side, and letting a loud sigh of resignation, I slowly nodded my head. Taking a seat in the table, I signaled for my brother to take the seat across from me, and sat beside me, while my mother sat next to my brother. "Do you really want to know? Even if what I am about to tell you will definitely change the way you look at me, even if it might change the way you feel about me?" "Yes," and replied, taking my face into her hands. "And nothing could ever change the way I feel about you. If this is something that we have to face, I want to be able to face it together with you." "Well," I said, looking at my brother, "why don't you get us started, brother?" The venom returned to my voice. "Anne," he began, ignoring the tone of my voice, "how much do you know about our family?" "Just what I have seen and what little your mom has told me." "You can divide our family right down the middle," he continued. "Half of our family is the normal 9 to 5 kind of people. They have great lives, they marry, they become contributing members of society. Then there is the not-so-much side of the family." "What does that mean?" and looked at me when she asked. "That means they are criminals, darling," my brother answered. "For many years, our family has been involved with some high-profile criminals within the cartels. Every generation, one family member is chosen to lead the family. They combine the riches we gather so that some of the children can make a life for themselves. Right now, I am the head of the family. Our uncle passed on the reins a few years ago, but I wasn't supposed to be the one. It was supposed to be me." I finished the speech. "I was the one that was supposed to take over the family business," and looked at me in complete shock. "But just like my father before me, I chose not to take the position." "Why?" and asked, "What made you decide that? Was it me?" "No, darling," my brother chuckled as he answered. "He had decided this long before he met you. But meeting you, I'm sure helped convince him that his decision was the right one." "Then what happened?" She had released my arm. I am sure she did not realize she had done that, but that was something I hadn't missed. Since I was 8 years old, I began. I was being modeled and tutored to learn the ins and outs of the business. What I thought were clever games were actually exercises developed to teach me the workings of how to be a criminal. They wanted a perfect leader. All I wanted was a childhood. But even then, what I wanted didn't matter a single bit. By the time I was 12, I was well adept at shooting a variety of different weapons with precision. What kind of boy does not want to play with guns? But again, what I thought were games were just training regiments. At 15, I started to notice how people acted around me. Always with some fear, sometimes with awe, respect even. But always fear. That was always the constant. My cousin Edgar was the one that made it clear that there was something going on. He would always stick with me every time we went out. I asked him once why he was always there. He just said that it was his place to be there. He said it like a fact that I was supposed to understand just with that explanation. "You see," Angel continued, Edgar was the chaperone. He would always be at his side. If anything happened, he had ways to contact any of us. You had the best life possible, but you walked away from it a spoiled little child, all because of one tiny little thing. One tiny thing. I stood from my chair, startling everyone in the room. My brother reached into his coat for a second, before slowly drawing his hand away. Even now, I added, you still fear me, just like almost everyone in the family. But we both know it wasn't a tiny little thing, brother. We both know what really happened. An accident, he said dismissively. You made me kill all those people. I replied. A sudden and devastating silence filled the room as Anne reached out and covered her mouth in shock, again not realizing her actions were driving that dagger into my heart. It was an accident, he said, standing as well. Besides, it made your reputation. It destroyed my life. I said, can you possibly imagine what that kind of thing can do to the psyche of a 15-year-old? Can you possibly imagine that? You're being dramatic, he said as he took his seat. Even now, you're still being nothing but an immature child. I was a child. I moved toward the refrigerator and grabbed one of the beers that were left from the previous night's festivities. You were a man, he said. We made sure of that. How did you do that? And spoke, looking at me and then moving her gaze at my brother. It doesn't matter, he continued. What matters is that he could have done great by the family. He could have done more than anyone before us. Instead, he developed a conscience and threw it all away because of one accident. It wasn't an accident, I replied. If it was an accident, brother, then why don't you tell and where our dear cousin Edgar is at this very moment? He's dead, my mother spoke, looking at Anne. He was stabbed to death in prison. And why did he end up going to prison, mother? I asked, the anger slowly emerging. It doesn't matter, Angel continued. His family is being cared for. Oh, so you mean you are being a good son to his parents? You're being a good provider to a wife that doesn't exist? A good father to children that were never born? I slammed my hands on the table as I continued, tell her, brother. Why did he have to die in prison? Like I said, he continued, it was an accident. What exactly happened? And asked, looking into my eyes, please tell me, baby. What happened? One of the things we would do for the community was small little projects, I began. Sometimes it was helping an old lady plant a garden. Sometimes it was routing electricity from one business to a home where they couldn't afford it. Doing that is kind of dangerous. You have to shut down the power to the block while you rewire the entire system. That way you can work with everything without risking electrocuting yourself. So it was not unusual for me to be climbing an electrical pole and wait for my brother here to give me the signal to start work. Edgar would go inside the house and set up the wiring inside while I did the wiring outside. Once Edgar would be ready, he would signal my brother, who would signal to me that it was good for me to turn the power back on. We had done it many times. I could rewire everything with my eyes closed. But this time, it was different. It didn't seem different then. But in hindsight, there were signals that I was too young to see then. The house we were rewiring was empty when Edgar went in. The job would take longer waiting for the people to actually get there. Angel simply said it was going to be a surprise for them to walk into their home and discover that they had electricity. It seemed plausible at the time. Edgar took longer inside the house than necessary, but again, it was something that I didn't realize until much later. When the people came back to the house, my brother still did not give me the signal. When more and more cars began piling outside the house and more people were entering, he still did not give me the signal. Once cars stopped showing up, he finally did. It was an accident, my mother said this time. How could anyone have known? Have known what, mother? That people would bring children to a party? He knew, mother, I said, pointing at Angel. He knew, and he still made me do it. Do what? And asked. When he gave me the signal, I connected the wires and started to make my way down from the pole. Then, the house. The police found that there was a gas leak inside the house, my brother continued. When they turned on an appliance in the house, the accumulated gas inside the house caused a spark in a faulty wire which ignited the entire place. No, I said, you had Edgar create the gas leak. You had Edgar strip the wires so that there would be a spark. You had me be the detonator. You sound just like the investigators, he said. You know it was an accident. If it was, I added, then tell me again why Edgar went to prison? Why did you and I? Why was he the only one that got convicted while you and I walked away? Because it was his fault, Angel continued. He was the one that messed up the wiring. He was the one that did not notice he had accidentally cracked a gas line and flooded the entire house in gas. It was an accident. Yet I still killed 24 men, women, and children. Faces that still haunt me to this day. Voices that speak to me in my waking hours. Tell me, brother, how do they sound to you? If they even still do. I looked at, and before I continued, we turned ourselves in. The police did their investigation. We were given community service for illegally tampering with the city electrical system, but Edgar got 24 counts of murder in the second degree. A month into his sentence, he was stabbed in the showers. No witnesses. It was a tragedy, my brother continued, looking at, and as he said this, the investigation was bullshit. Yeah, it was, I added. We should have gone to prison as well. Instead, here we are, sitting and talking while all those lives are gone. That's why I joined, and that's why I became a medic, so that I could do some good for someone, a way to repay a crime I committed because I trusted the wrong person. I trusted that my own brother would have the best intentions for me, and instead he turned me into a trigger. Yet that trigger became well known and feared, he continued, demon and angel. We became legends overnight because of a tragedy. People began to fear us even more, made business easier to handle when our competitors thought that we would go that far to ensure our business associations. You made a circus out of a tragedy, I added. What made you think that I would possibly agree to any of that? Looking at my mother, I continued. Why would I possibly want to have anything to do with a man that treats his own blood that way? But still, it has to be your way, mother. Regardless of what anyone could possibly think or feel, it has to be your way. Well, there you have it, mother. We had our little sit down. We told him the story of why my brother and I can't, and will never be in the same room ever again. Do you feel better about yourself, mother? We can look past this and just be a family, my brother said. Nothing with the family business, just brothers. Family. She looks like a good woman, he said, looking at Anne. And our mother deserves some peace of mind in this whole thing. You know, mother, I said as I emptied the beer in my hand. You don't have to worry about juggling between which one of your sons comes to visit. Once I leave, you won't have to worry about that ever again. Before anyone could say anything, I continued. I'll be leaving, and trust me, I won't be coming back. Angel, I would appreciate if you don't come by for the next few weeks until I leave. After that, feel free to visit whenever you'd like. If for some reason I ever have the need to come into town, I will make sure that you are informed as to where I will be and for how long so that we don't accidentally run into each other. But trust me, if I even feel a set of eyes in my back from anyone in the family, I will become very upset. If I am upset, there will be very little anyone can do to stop me from coming after you. Like you said, you did a great job building my reputation. As of this moment, you and I are brothers by name only. Next time I expect to see you will be at our parents' funerals. Your children are welcome to reach out to me if they ever need anything. This isn't what I wanted, my mother said, crying openly this time. I just wanted you two to get together and talk so that we could become normal again. I told you not to get in the middle of it. My father's voice broke the tension, his hands full with grocery bags. As I moved to help him, he continued, and I told you to leave and out of it. I am sorry you have to bear this burden, girl. You should not have gotten involved in it. But of course my wife does not listen to anyone but herself. Turning to Angel, he continued, Son, you are always welcome in this home, but I think you should leave for now. Yeah, Pops. He stood and embraced our mother. I understand. Walking toward me, he extended his hand. I'm glad you are here. You are looking good, brother. I only hoped that we could put this behind us. As I shook his hand, I continued, I'll walk you outside. Turning to my father, I made it clear that what I was going to say next was meant for only Angel's ears. As we stepped outside, I could see that the same car and driver were waiting for him. Listen, Angel, I will do my best to keep whatever peace we can between us. But do not test me, do not reach out to me, and do not think that I want to come back to the business. I want nothing to do with it. Shaking his hand again, I added, May I never see you again. For what it's worth, brother, he said, holding back tears of his own. I am sorry, she is a hell of a woman. Take good care of her. I know, I said, and I will. I was half expecting to see blood somewhere in the floor, my father said as he walked towards our hiding spot. My mother was not aware that I smoked, and was under the impression that my father had quit smoking a few years back. In fact, I was the only one that knew he smoked, a secret we shared gladly. I'm sorry, son. I told her not to try to do this, but you know your mother. Yeah, I said as I took a drag out of the cigarette. I didn't think she would go this far, though. How is Anne? What do you expect? He said, she's in shock. It's not an easy story to take in, you know? But she loves you, son. She'll come around. It wasn't your fault. The courts and the families both know this. You seem to be the only one blaming yourself. It's hard not to, Dad, I continued, my thoughts interrupted by the sound of the front door being opened. I think this one is for you. Want me to hold your cigarette? No, son, he added as he threw it away. I think it's for you. We both looked at and looking for us. Let her tell you what she thinks. Don't make up her mind for her. I think it's time you and I had a word, don't you? She said as she moved towards us. And I will definitely need one of your cigarettes. While I assume you'll need this, she pulled a six-pack of beers from seemingly nowhere. Taking one of them, I asked, what do you need to talk about? Was it really an accident, or do you really think that your brother organized it? When we were in court, I began. All the evidence pointed to it being an accident. But if you knew my brother, and the way he thinks, everything with him is a long series of preparations. He is nothing if not methodical and precise. I wouldn't put it past him to have planned this as some sort of payback or warning for someone, somewhere. Then why do you blame yourself? Because I connected those wires, I replied. I caused the explosion. I pulled the trigger, even if I didn't know that I was handling a loaded weapon. It is still my fault. You know, she added, this explains a whole lot of things about you. I'm sorry you got thrown in the middle of this, but yeah, I guess it does. Now I understand why you said you had cheated on me when that girl kissed you, and why you reacted the way you did when I screwed that guy. Yeah, I replied. This was not a conversation I wanted to have, but I knew that it had to happen. So what do we do now? How do you feel about what you learned? You have been carrying this weight for years, a weight of guilt you don't deserve. If anything, it just makes you look like you have integrity. If you thought you would get rid of me with that story, sorry Buster, but you have failed. I'm even more crazy about you. She leaned and kissed me softly in the lips. But your mom is devastated. I don't really care, I replied. She eventually needs to learn to stop meddling, and that not everything can work out the way she wants it. Some things cannot be fixed. She meddled between us, and said as she leaned and kissed me again, that's gotta count for something. It does, I replied. The rest of the time was thankfully uneventful, and then I had a lot of sex. I don't think a night came when I didn't screw, and where we did not sleep clutching each other. But eventually my time back home would end and I would have to move on to my next duty station. I had known for a while that I wanted him to go with me. Yeah, call me whatever you like. But I did love this woman. When she packed her stuff, she did so knowing that she was taking a gamble. We were moving across the country without a plan other than she was slowly becoming a girlfriend. The day came and the long drive to Georgia saw us becoming closer and closer to one another. I was looking forward to the stability of a new adventure. So, are you going to be living with me? Or are you going to be stuck living in the barracks? That was a fair question. Like I said, I am not a long-term planner, and this thought had honestly not crossed my mind. We'll figure something out, was all I could say. I'm honestly not even sure if I'm walking into a deployment, or if I'll have time to get stabilized before it happens. You already know you will be deploying? Well, we're going to a Ranger bat, babe, I replied. They deploy all the time. I would suspect that I'll be up for one as soon as possible, if not when I get there. My words turned to be prophetic. When we got to Savannah, I was notified that I had 2 weeks to settle any issues before I was to be put on a plane and meet the rest of my platoon in beautiful Baghdad. Within that time, and then I decided that the smart thing to do was to get married so that she could be covered with my benefits, so that she could settle any issues in my absence, and so that there could be something stable waiting for me back home. By the time our wedding festivities were over, I was gone. Baghdad was a strange experience. As a brand new medic, I was immediately assigned to a rifle squad which was tasked with clearing a large portion of the southern parts of the city. Soon, we were sent to Samarra, where we took part in the large offensive against insurgent forces that had taken large parts of the land for themselves and posed a large and continuous threat to foreign nationals and security forces. Immediately after, back to Baghdad, in the bloodiest part of my first deployment. The first trip back home was celebrated by the spouses waiting for their husbands to return from the horrors of war. The airport was packed with supporters. The second trip saw a little less people. The third even less. By the fourth, even and did not show up to greet us. These trips had become so common that they seemed like a natural event. Less and less marriages survived those trips. Many of the friends I had made had ended up divorced, separated, and that shine in their eyes had dulled a little. It doesn't get easier, does it? I asked Werkman, the first person I had met once I had fully integrated into the new unit. We had talked about Moyers and Kitchen. I learned quite a lot about my instructors. Somehow learning about them made them look less ominous and more human-like. No, he replied, but it becomes more normal. That's just the same, I guess. We really can't hope for more during these times. It's a mad world, D. Everyone had taken to calling me by just one letter instead of a name. At least everyone in my unit or other uniformed services. What are you going to do until we get called up again? Drink, I guess, he replied. My wife went back home to her mom's after our second deployment. I might go visit her, but it feels like there is nothing to talk about. Yeah, I picked up my duffel bag and started making my way to the waiting bus. I am running out of things to talk about as well. It's hard to make them understand, you know? They weren't there, he replied as he followed me. Even with your fancy words, I am sure you would find it hard to paint that picture for them. At least we don't have such a shitty job as the sir does, having to send all those letters back home. That's gotta wear down on your soul after as long as he's been doing it. There's a lot of empty seats now, I said. Truly there were. Once upon a time, this very bus would be crowded, filled with laughs and boastful screams. Now, all that remained was empty seats to remind us of those faces that would not make it back, and the piercing silence made the short trip back to base seem like an eternity. You watch yourself, brother, Workman said as we started the climb down and headed to our vehicles. Not everyone stayed over there. The suicide rate was high among people like us. The system was not set up to deal with so many men and women returning with unseen scars. You too, I replied. I'm just a phone call away. As we went our own ways, I couldn't help but experience that fear all military members have in those fleeting moments when we return home after being away for so long. It's always the same. Would we be returning to an empty home? A cheating spouse with a new live-in lover? I had forgiven in a long time ago, but that fear was always gnawing at the back of my mind. The abundant stories of others experiencing that very situation did not make it easier to ignore. Few even in our unit suffered that and did not deal with it well. But as I pulled into my driveway, my heart skipping a beat brought me back to reality. There she was, waiting for me just like she had done every time I have been away. I knew we would argue. I knew we would fight about the constant deployments, but that would be tomorrow. For today, we would just enjoy our love. What do you want me to tell you? I want you to realize that I didn't marry you for a pension, a paycheck, or for benefits. Instead, as she tried to wrap herself even more around my body. We were laying in bed after a great session where once again she tried to kill me with sex. But unlike the other times we had this talk, this time she did not try to hide the tears. The way you are living your life, I don't think you'll see 30. I can't just leave, it is a contract, and I still have 2 years left in this one. And then what? Re-enlist again? Go officer? What are you going to do then? What are we going to do? I reached out and held her close, trying to kiss away her tears as she tried to protest. Soon, our lips met, and even as she tried to hit my chest with her fists, our tongues wrestled with one another. I hate you. Then, leave. She grabbed me even tighter. No one is keeping you here by force. She climbed on top of me, pinning me against the bed while she continued to kiss me. You can be a real a-hole sometimes, she said. We had sex. Once she regained her breath, she continued, I don't think I can do another one. You leaving, I don't think I can take it. What do you mean? My heart beginning to break as she spoke those words. You want to leave? No, she said, holding my face. I don't want you to go. Every time you come back, you're always missing a piece of you. And one day, I think that the man that returns will no longer be the one that I fell in love with. Get some sleep, I said as I grabbed some clothes. I need a drink. When the next one comes down the line, I'll get you a plane ticket to go back home. As she softly sobbed into her pillow, I headed to the backyard and lit a cigarette, wondering if we had made a terrible decision by getting married, wondering if we would survive. The weeks came and went, and as we all suspected, orders had come down for another deployment, and as we had discussed, and received a plane ticket to go home with my parents while I was gone. Our last night together was bittersweet. We talked. She cried while I packed my uniforms. Then I drove her to the airport. Please, come back to me, was all she said as she boarded. Have a safe trip, was all I replied. Fallujah, what a bloodbath. I can't remember how many patients came through my area, but I did use up all my supplies and resupplies several times over. By the end of the long firefight, not a single dry eye was in the house. Some cried for their fallen comrades. Others cried because of the adrenaline simply coming to a stop. I wish I could tell you that I thought about my wife waiting back home, that some part of me realized that her fears were becoming a possibility, or that somehow this latest brush with death solidified my decision as to stay in the service or get out. But all of that would be a lie. I just thought about the man I was working on, patch a wound, tourniquet a blast injury, stabilize, and move on to the next. Yes, it sounds very calloused, but there simply was no time for me to get attached. In fact, what made me so successful was that ability to look at my patients as faceless and nameless individuals. Except once. After a few weeks in theater, my squad was charged with going around the neighboring towns in an effort to rebuild and maintain ties with the locals. This was an effort to help reach out in order to gather soft intelligence, and because of my status as a medical professional, to provide with medical care that would otherwise be inaccessible to these people. Because of the culture, it was extremely difficult for me, a male, to properly interview and treat any of the female villagers over a certain age. However, there was a little girl in that particular village who I had taken a special liking to. She was an adorable little girl who always followed us around asking for candy, which she would share with her younger siblings. Needless to say, we often gave her whatever candy and other small things we in the country take for granted, but to them made a life-changing difference. We visited this particular town 3 times without any conflicts. The townsfolk always embraced us with open arms, and the elder would always invite us for tea. We believed that this was a good step to secure in order to maintain those ties, until one day when things just fell apart. On our 4th visit, the little face that we all had gotten used to seeing every time we walked into the village was missing. The villagers were acting much more differently than in any previous occasion, and even the elder seemed a little apprehensive to allow us into his home. As our translator worked feverishly to try to re-establish those lines of communication, a few members of my squad and myself decided to make a few visits to the homes of several villagers we had come to grow fond of. One of those was the little girl. As we walked toward her house, we discovered the reason why this young child had not greeted us. Malik. My squad leader began screaming as we immediately took security positions around the rubble where their home used to stand. Malik, get your butt out here, double time? What the hell is going on out here? Our platoon sergeant asked before the sight silenced him completely. Who the hell did that? Malik, the squad leader continued, you translate what I am about to tell you, word for word. If you need to explain the feeling behind the words, you go on ahead and do so. You tell them all as loud as you can. This family was innocent. You give me 1 guilty, or I will give you 100 innocents. You have 2 hours. Do you understand what I am saying, Malik? As Malik looked at our platoon sergeant, the platoon sergeant just said, what the hell are you waiting on? Translate. Malik did, and as he finished his speech, with practiced precision we started going home by home, searching fanatically, and pulling the male figures from each home. Home after home, we searched, we turned over furniture, we cleared acceptable weapons caches. This was a tactic to cause fear and confusion in the town and hopefully give us acceptable results. My friends, Malik began. This is unacceptable. This is not right. These people have done nothing. They are innocents trying to survive from fear. Well, Malik, I replied as I took a seat outside the elder's home. They still have half an hour before they are 100 innocent short. If I were you, I would suggest that they hurry and give us the guilty. I heard an all-familiar sound at that moment, then continued, you hear that, Malik? American air support. You know what that means. You should explain it to them. This was a very thin-veiled threat. I effectively told him that we would bomb their village if we did not get our anticipated results. Again, he translated as was his job. Panic and terror are universal. Doc, Malik approached me just after a few minutes after our latest exchange. You are calm-headed. Please, I beg you, speak with me for a moment. While his words were clearly an attempt to get us to change our tactics, his demeanor indicated more than that. This was renewed panic in his face, revealed only through his eyes. What is it, Malik? I reached for my sidearm. This was again more a showing of power than an actual threat to Malik, and I think he understood what I was trying to do. This was a dangerous culture, and he had to maintain face with his people regardless of the help he was already giving us. Every day he worked with us, his own family was put at risk. My squad leader saw us, and immediately reading the situation, he approached us, weapon at the ready as if he found that Malik could become a threat at any given second. What's going on, Doc? Malik has something to tell us in confidence, I replied, reaching for my ever-present pack of cigarettes. So, tell us. There is a man that wants to speak, Malik began. There are many, but they are afraid. There is terrors in this town, and once you leave they will again strike. They are the ones that took what they call justice on the family, because they accepted American medicine and American kindness. Which one? My squad leader did not break eye contact with Malik as he spoke. Don't look, just tell me which one it is. When Malik identified the man, he continued, I'm sorry for what is about to happen, Malik. With that, he used the side of his weapon to strike Malik in his upper back, but to the distant crowd it would have looked like a solid strike to the back of the head. I stood to help Malik back on his feet before pushing him to walk towards the crowd. Translate, Malik, I said as I looked at the platoon sergeant, hoping that he understood that the situation was completely under control. It's time. I guess we will begin interviewing each innocent until we find ourselves a proper guilty one. I pushed Malik hard, causing him to fall down. Speak. You. Now. He did. You. The squad leader grabbed a random man. You come with me. Sarge?" As he looked at platoon sergeant, they both began to move toward the elder's house as I continued to push Malik. "You can make sure that their death struggle is honorable," I said as I continued to push Malik and guided him to the elder's house. Once there, I grabbed Malik and shook his hand. "I am sorry, my friend. It had to happen this way." "I understand," Malik replied, "but this is not the man." "I know," the squad leader replied, "but this is what will give them fear. Tell this man to start his prayers, Malik." As he finished his statement, he loudly pulled the charging handle of his M4 so that the man could hear. As Malik finished speaking and the man began, the platoon sergeant put a gag on the man's mouth and the squad leader fired a shot into the ground. We quickly secured the prisoner, putting a blind over his head and securing his hands behind his back, then moved him inside the elder's home. "What are you doing?" Malik said. "We just executed a prisoner, Malik," I replied. "Or at least that is what they will think." We moved toward the crowd and grabbed a second man, repeated the process as with the first one. The third man was the one Malik had identified, and after securing him as we had done the previous ones, Malik spoke to him. Within minutes, we had identified all the terrors in their respective domiciles. After 2 more prisoners, one of which was the first identified terror, we began to clear homes once again. This time, however, we were fully aware which homes needed extra inspections. "We are doing it like this in case there are other terrors in the crowd, Malik," I said before he could ask his question. I could see he was confused by our actions. If one of them reports back, he will report that one of his fellow warriors was the one that gave them all away. "I understand, my friend," he said. "It is a very dangerous game you play." "It's far better than the alternative," I replied. "If we arrest innocents, more will flock to their lines. This way, they have what we call plausible deniability. And if they are punished unjustly, they will turn to us for help and identify even more of the bad guys." 3 hours later, we had uncovered a small IED factory, a large weapons cache, and large amounts of money. "Are there any more that you know?" Our platoon sergeant confirmed with our informant that all known terrors were our custody before we released all the innocent men we had taken. The mood of the townsfolk greatly increased once they realized that we had not taken innocent lives, and the elder approached us with relief. We left the village, knowing we could not go back for the foreseeable future for their own safety. Each of us, according to our own customs, paid respects to the little girl that had made us feel a little more human in this hellish place filled with death and despair. Each of us mourned in our own way. The men we had taken into custody provided us with a great amount of intelligence, and based on that we were able to mount several successful raids on previously unknown targets and training grounds. "Hey, D," Workman said, "Platoon Daddy wants you to take a few days in the clinic." "I don't like clinic work," I replied as I continued repacking one of my 3 aid bags. In each of them I had all the equipment that I would need to hopefully face any outcome and eventuality. "Yeah, about that," he said as he stopped me. "It really wasn't a request. How much time have you spent in the FOB during this rotation?" "I don't know," I replied honestly. "A few hours maybe." "D, we have been here for 2 months," he replied, concern in his voice for the first time. "Even the line guys are starting to get concerned about the time you spend outside the wire." "Am I slipping?" "No," he replied, "but you need some time to think, process, recharge as much as you can in this place. Have you even called your wife?" "No," I again replied. Truly, I hadn't even thought about, and the entire time we had been here save for a few fleeting seconds, I've been busy. "Well," he replied as he took the aid bag from my hands, "you aren't busy anymore. Call her. Go to clinic duties, sleep in a bed, eat not packaged food, jack off in the porta potty just like every normal guy here. I don't care what you do other than calling her and skipping this next mission. Who is going to cover my guys?" "New blood. Name's right. He'll take over for now. You're gonna send the newbie in for me?" "You know what's funny?" he replied as he smiled at me with that devilish grin that implied sarcasm. "I said the same thing when they sent you to replace me." With that argument lost, I grabbed my equipment and tried to find the assigned room that I had been given. Shamefully, I lost my way to it twice, and once more after visiting the chow hall. I sat in my bunk checking and rechecking my aid bag, making sure everything was in its proper place. I made my way to the chapette and got a phone card and made that phone call I had promised to make. I let the phone ring 5 times before giving up and hanging up. Dinner chow was far more crowded. There were a lot of faces that I hadn't seen. As I moved to one of the empty tables, a voice broke my concentration. "Doc," the voice said. I did not turn as I was not the only medic there, and each of us that carried that title had earned it. "Doc," the voice said again, this time closer to me, and I turned to see who was calling me. It was a much younger guy walking around in crutches while one of his buddies carried his tray of food. "You look like hell, Doc." "It's been a few weeks," I replied, trying to place him and failing miserably. I did not see a tab on his uniform. This was a regular boot. "No worries," he said as he recognized that I couldn't place him. "You pulled me out of the burning Humvee a few weeks back. You saved my bacon, Doc. I just wanted to say thanks." "It's my job," I said before returning to my food. "Have a seat." "Tell me all about it." I was trying not to sound sarcastic, and luckily he understood. "We got hit in Haifa. Our own medic took shrapnel to the neck. Your squad was in the vicinity of our AO, and you guys rushed in," he said. Then he extended his hand. "By the way, name's Greenway." "Again, thank you, Doc." I shook his hand. "No problem. How did your medic make out?" "He got evac to Ramstein. He made it is all we know." He looked at this buddy and continued, "This is the guy I told you about in the Moscow. So you treated 37 casualties?" Another voice spoke, this one from behind me. "How did you do that?" "One at a time," I replied. "Any casualties?" "No, Doc," Greenway continued. "You saved us all. You're a legend, you know? My CO was trying to find out who you were to put you in for something." "No need," I said. "I was just doing my job." As I looked around me, a small crowd was beginning to gather. I picked up my tray. "Glad you guys made it back. Take care." With that, I simply tossed my half-eaten food away and once again got lost on my way to my sleeping quarters. A very helpful soldier helped me find my way. As I thanked him, he just smiled. "New to the FOB?" "You could say that," I replied. "Guess I shouldn't be going out for a run. Might get lost again." "I'm gonna hit the shower in about an hour," he replied, laughing. "If you want a guide, I'll be sure to walk by here." He left as we shared a laugh. I gathered my items and patiently waited, tried calling and once more. This time I gave it 3 rings before hanging up. "Trying to call the old lady?" my new friend asked as I stepped into the showers. "Yeah, no luck?" "Man, don't even trip. It's still pretty early over in the States. She might be sleeping." "Yeah, you're not new here," he continued. "How do you keep getting so lost in this place?" "I'm just terrible with directions," I replied with a half-hearted laugh. "This is not the place to be bad at that," he said in the middle of a loud laugh. "I'm sure you'll need some help finding the clinic tomorrow, aren't you?" "What makes you think that?" "Come on," he replied. "You got that look to you." "I'm still trying to figure out if you're going as a patient." "I hear their psych doc is pretty hot." "A3 looks like a 10 if given enough time," I replied to more laughter. "Ain't that a fact?" he said. "I'll wait outside while you finish." "No hurry, man." I finished my shower and met my new friend. We shared a cigarette as we walked back and talked about nonsensical things. That night, I slept on the ground, and my dreams were filled with blood, screams, and Anne's face which faded more and more with each minute I spent in that world of oblivion. As I drifted on and off from sleep, I wondered how much of me would be left by the time I made it back, and if I was being honest with myself, I was wondering if I would make it back. The dream was always the same. I am walking toward my flight talking to an unseen individual. All I know is that in the dream I am getting ready for another flight back into theater as overhead the voice in the terminal notifies us that a flight got canceled. Not my flight, but someone's flight. And as we walk by the long line of planes, there is one that is nothing more than a smoldering wreckage. Well, I'll tell my unseen companion. It looks like we just found out why the flight got canceled. We laugh. We board our own flight and head east to the sounds of artillery and machine gun fire. Almost like a well-scripted rendition of a historical World War II battle. The combined smell of gunpowder and jet fuel burning fill my nostrils, and every time just before I am going to hear my companion speak, another sound wakes me. It's the same dream every night. A few details change, the color of the clothing I am wearing, the surrounding airport details, but other than that everything is the same. Even the moment when my sleep is interrupted is the same. This time it was the sounds of a large explosion. We had gotten used to the constant barrage of indirect fire from the insurgent forces. The mortars seldom hit anything important, but sometimes they get lucky. "That's not mortar fire," Werkman said as he too was shaken from his own sleep. "If anyone is more of an expert in mortar fire, it's him." A few days ago he had moved into the small shack. It made sense after all, we were in the same squad, and we had spent many an hour talking about the various close calls we have had throughout our lives. His came in a previous deployment in Afghanistan as he was attached to a group of snipers overlooking a known terrorist training cell. Another group had been spotted, and the all-too familiar terror response was to clear their sectors using highly inaccurate mortar rounds. As the mortar team readjusted their fire and literally walked the shells toward his position, Werkman and his team remained stoic and resolute. I could feel the rocks from the shell impacts hitting my legs, he told me once, each one pegging me like tiny ant bites. Then their fire shifted and missed us completely, or so I thought. Between the sniper and myself was a small crater, big mortar round sitting right smack in the middle of it. A dud. I nearly shit myself. Truth be told, I more than likely would have shit myself. And as we moved toward the sounds of explosions and the wails of pain and misery, I realized that he was horribly right. This was not a mortar round that got lucky. This was far worse and far more personal. The investigations later revealed that this was a suicide bomber that had strapped a grenade in his chest as he walked into the chow hall that busy morning. Whatever his reasons or logic would remain his, all that the investigators could do is make some well-informed guesses. I couldn't tell you what he was thinking at that moment when he walked through the doors and entered a building where up until a few hours before he had worked it himself. All I can tell you is about the smell of copper and burnt skin that filled the air. And I can tell you about the screams and the chaos that quickly became well organized. I can tell you about how much gauze and Curlix I used that morning, how long my voice was gone from all the shouting I had to do in order to organize what little help I received. I can tell you how quickly we went from face to face making immediate assessments as to which person received immediate care and which ones probably would not make it. I can tell you the look in their eyes when you moved on from them onto the next person, their fate sealed within seconds by your experience and the amount of equipment on hand. Tria. Hours passed as if they were seconds. More and more blood was cleaned. Less screaming and more body bags were piled. Our security force quickly covered the grounds looking for a possible second attack or an incoming force, but they found nothing. Unspent tears just pilled in the eyes of the soldiers that were seeing their friends and brothers and sisters being solemnly carried away. A few soldiers yelled at me, blamed me for not being fast enough with my interventions, not having more medical knowledge than I did, for letting their friend die. I agreed with each and every one of them. When the last of the injured was treated and evacuated, Werkman and I made our way back to my shack and made our usual post-mission tradition: smoke and breathe. We got a mission coming up. Werkman broke the silence after our second cigarette. It was supposed to be intel gathering, but I think that might change. It might, I replied. When were we supposed to head out? Tonight. A sarcastic laugh, a shake of the head, eyes drawn to the ground. I knew exactly how he felt at that moment. But I don't think it's happening. Our interpreter was the first one I triaged. Piece of wood through the chest. Doubt he even saw it coming. When are we meeting the platoon, Daddy? I knew this was going to be happening soon with the recent events, but it was not something I was looking forward to doing. Waiting for them to come get us. Really, he replied, at least for more serious accountability other than, oh yeah, I saw them too working the site, but it wouldn't surprise me if that takes a while. Nope, I replied. Think it's happening now. The runner was driving the little Rhino ATV like a man possessed, honking his tiny horn with a sense of urgency and eyes that reflected the terror we all felt. Holy shit, heard you guys were in the middle of it. We thought the worst, always with the sense of dread. The Fobbit, a man that never saw life outside the wire. You here to get us? Werkman was needless to say not a fan. Yeah, hop on, he replied. Sarge is going to be happy to see you guys. Word is we're headed out for a big counter-offensive, and you guys might be headed out with the snipers. All of us. Werkman always held a grudge, or just the same names. You guys are on high demand, he continued, missing the obvious jab. You got people asking for you left and right. Sarge will fill you guys in on the details, but as far as I know, you guys are headed out in a few hours. As we approached the main tent that was used as a makeshift headquarters, our driver made a showing of coming to a dramatic halt. You would think that the medics would have better accommodations, but the reason for these was simple. We could easily turn the tent into a facility to handle any overflow of patients. Also, as medics, our mantra was to always be mobile. This was the best way to achieve that standard. Was it shitty? Yeah. Was it convenient for our needs? Yeah, at least our needs when it came to supporting our respective units. You too, Sarge yelled as we approached. Get your carcass in here. Now. If I didn't know any better, Werkman said, I would think you got us in trouble again. It's not just me with the running mouth that gets others into trouble, I replied. My incredible sarcasm was legendary. Rank did not matter most of the time as I went into one of those well-known rants. Most of the time I was in the losing end of those exchanges. All of the times they ended with my face on the ground performing some menial corrective training. Werkman was the same. Heard about what you guys did, Sarge continued, ignoring our banter. Hell of a place to be in. You guys made some tough calls. Couldn't have been done any other way. You guys are headed out. Pack your shit. Yeah, Werkman said. Fobbit already gave us the heads up. Sarge burned holes into Fobbit with his eyes as the former jumped into the Rhino and headed out somewhere else. In search of the one, I guess. Just once, Sarge quietly said as he rubbed his tired face. Just once. Could you not be such an a-hole? I don't think it's physically possible, I replied. He'd go into withdrawals. And the less clever of the Wonder Twins speaks, Sarge continued as he looked at me. How about you? Can you not be an a-hole at least for a few hours? Why does he get hours and I get a full day? Workman whined. Sarge's neck vein was about to explode. Listen up, a-holes, he continued as we laughed. Both of you are going to head out. 3-day patrol with the ghosts to observe a high-value target area. They requested medics because of the highly likely chance that they will need to engage targets in their immediate vicinity. Close-range targets. One of you will be with the sniper team. The other will be boots on the ground with the assault element. They'll serve as a quick reaction force to the targets identified by the sniper team. Hopefully the intel we have received proves right, and we can pin the son of a bitch responsible for coordinating the attack from today. I got sniper duty, Workman said. D can walk around for a few hours. He could use the exercise. So we have a sniper team to guide a QRF into a high-value target? I was honestly confused by the situation. Look, Sarge replied, understanding where my confusion was coming from. All I know is that this target needs to be brought in for questioning. Sniper team is in place as a last measure if the target cannot be secured, and to provide an overwatch for the QRF. Damn, I added. Who the hell are we trying to get? Dude must be connected as shit. Don't know, his brash mannerisms back. They asked to provide 2 of my best medics. They're gonna have to settle for you too. Saddle up, ladies. We'll see you in a few days. It only took 2 days of constant watching and waiting. 2 long days of hearing nothing but silence on the radio. Once we reported to our assigned units, we received a full brief regarding our target. This man wanted to talk. He wanted to reveal as much information as he could on the terror network that had taken a family member. It was such a secret that he wanted to talk that even he didn't know it. That's how good our intelligence was at the moment. It had taken hours to find the target, or at least the house where he was staying. We learned his pattern, his habits. We saw his family go about their normal daily lives as if they didn't have a care in the world. By day 2, we knew we could make the grab. The man enjoyed his tobacco a little too much, and feeling completely safe in his village, he would often leave his guards to watch his family while he disguised himself and went to the local bazaar for more tobacco and hashish. The planning was the most difficult part of any operation. This one was more challenging because we would be operating in timelines measured in seconds. But when the time came, the team directed us to the target, and within minutes we were out of the area. When the guards became concerned that the man was not returning, they began to move in an erratic search. Our sniper had been waiting for that moment like a child waiting for Christmas morning, for silent shots, and it was over. His information would lead to the assassination of one of the highest value targets and a powerful emir of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. We secured his family, and by the 3rd day, I was packing my things for the flight back home. After the usual sequestration and the barrage of tests, I decided it was time to go see my wife. I had made my decision. I had seen too much death and gave too many years of myself away. It was time to give my remaining years to my loving wife. It was time to start a family, get my education, get that white picket fence with the 2 kids and a dog. But first there was a lot of work that Ann and I had to do. I knew that a lot of the damage done in our marriage was on me. I hoped we could discuss it as adults. When I saw her for the first time, the same welcoming passion was there, the same glimmer in her eye, the same love and tenderness when we held each other and kissed. It was all the same, and I loved every second of the familiarity. Like always, she knew that the few details that I could share with her regarding my experiences would only make the mental image that she had of what I actually experienced seem much worse. In reality, I couldn't fathom her being able to create imagery that could be worse than the reality of my experiences. I missed you, she told me one morning as we lay in bed together. It's like you are back. Finally. We have to go to counseling, I told her. There is still a lot of me missing. I just want you to know that I love you. I remember her saying, above anything, I love you with all that I am. Please tell me you believe me, baby. Of course, I looked at her. And I love you, with everything that I have left. And I did. With as much as I had left, I loved every second that I was with her. She was my everything. Until she wasn't. It was 3 months after I had returned home from the last deployment, where I saw over 75 brothers die and lost so much more of myself, when she finally told me. We had been going to counseling for about 3 sessions when she asked to have individual sessions with the provider, something that caught me off guard admittedly, but it was to be expected. After a few sessions with her, the provider called and booked individual sessions for me. The doctor took each session to talk to me about conflict resolution, problem management, anger management, and how to properly manage stress. I figured and had seen some issues at home that I couldn't see, and the doctor was helping me address those issues. Babe, and began our latest session together after input from the doctor. You know I love you with all my heart. I want you to know that. It's very important that you know that. Okay, I replied. Confused by the turn of events, I looked at the doctor. I love you too, and with everything that I have left. You know that. I need to tell you that I am pregnant, she began. As she saw the smile appear in my face, she continued, I don't know if you're the father. Remember all we have been working on. I remember the doctor telling me as I walked out of the office. Remember all those techniques you learned? Screw your techniques, I shouted in the waiting room. And screw that bitch too. D, I heard a voice from the waiting room. Bro, come on, let's get you out of here. Baby, please. And was sobbing as she tried to make her way toward me. We need to talk about this. 1 hour hooker, I said in that quiet and hushed tone that she had not heard me use in years. That tone has been described as the icy whisper of death, far more frightening than my usual cursing. The few people that have heard it also describe it as impossibly calm. A voice that should soothe you, yet it does the exact opposite. You have 1 hour to get your shit and get the hell out of my house. Dude, my faceless friend continued. Not here, bro. I realized it was Werkman, once again here when I needed him. Let's take a breather outside, man. See what's going on. What's going on, that icy tone replied, is that I married a 304 who is carrying another man's child. What is going on is that my marriage is over. All eyes looked at Anne. What's going on is that the bitch and her new, whatever he is, can be happy together. I'm done. This is not proper. Shut the hell up. I looked at the doctor. Here's your conflict resolution. I'm out. I'm done. I quit. Looking at Anne, I continued. You win. Take whatever you want. Take everything. I don't care. I'm just done. That's not what I want, was all I heard as Werkman pulled me out of hearing range. What the hell? Werkman was having issues wrapping his head around the situation. Dude, I'm sorry. It happens, I replied. Guess it was just my turn. Do you know who it is? Didn't care enough to ask, I replied. Having a name would give me a target. You know I would take it, if given the chance. Not worth it, bro, he said. Keep your shot group tight. Get to Jag. Talk to them to get a referral for a lawyer before she does. I did. The divorce was laughable to say the least. Her lawyer tried the normal tactics that you hear about, all without much success. I had hired a gorgeous woman as a lawyer, blonde hair and green eyes with a slight twang and a little airhead demeanor. But this lady was sharp, she was fierce, and she loved military men like a mother to her children. Anne's divorce asked for counseling. My own lawyer reminded them that we had already done counseling without success. She then reminded him of Anne's current pregnancy status and how the child was potentially someone else's, all while I had been deployed. He advised her to move back home. The laws in Texas are far different than the ones in Georgia. There we could not get divorced until the baby was born and paternity was established. She did. All the while she kept trying to get me to talk, tried to get me to forgive, tried to get me to try anything but the divorce. I'll let you screw any girl you want, whenever you want, anything. I just took a job with a contractor company, was my reply. My lawyer has a power of attorney to act on my behalf. I leave to Iraq next spring. But you said you were tired of deployments, she said. You said you didn't want to see more death. You said you would be faithful and loyal to me for as long as we both live, I retorted. I guess we're both liars. 3 months later, and gave birth to a healthy baby boy, light skin and red hair. There was no need for a DNA test, but the court mandated it. When the judge saw the baby, he sighed deeply and stamped our divorce papers without even looking at the test results. When her lawyer complained, the judge read them out loud as a matter of public record. Somewhere in the case files of Texas Family Court, there is a transcript that states that a woman once cheated on a deployed soldier with a boy pretending to be a man and ended up getting pregnant by a third man that was not named. Maury's wet dream. After a few weeks, and moved out of my parents' property. My mother was of course devastated that her perfect little daughter-in-law turned out to be a 304. I don't think she ever found the father of her son, and if she did, he did not play much of a role in their lives. Last I heard, she had found herself another man, a preacher of all things. The day she told me was the day the last piece of any love for her died. I just told her not to cheat on him and to be happy. She broke my heart, tore our marriage apart, and gets to enjoy a new family and that white picket fence. I would be headed to the Middle East for the first time as a contractor, alone. The last person I spoke to was Werkman. He was headed for Washington State and a new assignment. That sucks, man. Sorry you had to go through that, he told me. Yeah, what could have been, right? Don't do that to yourself, bro. You'll kill yourself with the what-ifs and get absolutely nowhere. It can't be helped, though, I replied. I'm sure I had a lot to do with the strains in the marriage, but still. It's not the equipment, bro, he said as he shook my hand. You just haven't found the right operator. Take care of yourself, my man. I'll see you when you get back. That would be the last time I would ever see my friend. 3 months later, he would be leading a convoy through the mountains of Afghanistan, and his vehicle would hit an IED. On his 7th deployment, in a cold Saturday morning, my friend Werkman would succumb to injuries. His wife followed him soon after he was buried. She took a large amount of sleeping pills and went out in search of her husband in whatever land lies beyond this one. By the time I made it back home, the grass in his grave was beginning to turn yellow and a chill was beginning to take hold of the land. I'm sorry I wasn't there, brother, I said as I carefully laid the pack of cigarettes and the 6-pack of beer on top of the grave. If I was, it probably would have been me in that vehicle and you'd still be home. So would your wife. I'm so very sorry. Is he the friend you were telling me about? My girlfriend Angie carefully swept the few stray leaves from the grave marker, trying her best to show respect for the man interred within. This is one of them, I replied. This one is the crazy SOB that I deployed with all those times. I was trying to hold back the tears. It's been a while, brother. I know I should have come sooner, but I just couldn't bring myself to. Things were difficult, but I wanted you to know. I think I might have found the right operator, and I wanted you to meet her. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.